What a beautiful day indeed. Isn't this awesome? What a great showing. So thank you for hosting and having me as a speaker for you today too. So I'm going to juggle this one-handed because I was this winter pretending or showing my kids how cool I am at the snowboard park up in the Lake Tahoe. And I showed myself a lesson doing that. So anyways, let's see. So I'm going to start off today talking a little bit about a project that we've been involved with. I get a little bit more background. Our company and group has been involved with supporting the TMDL monitoring for the lake for about 10 years. We have people on the ground in the lakes, both Canyon Lake and Lake Elsinore, monthly, and actually Lake Elsinore biweekly during the summer months. So we're kind of the eyes and ears out there seeing how things are going. We're looking at the water quality. We're looking at the conditions as they change and so forth, and it's helping us get a real understanding of what we see out there. So it's been a real honor to be able to be involved with these monitoring programs. There's other programs that are being supported as well in PDS programs and special studies. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is going to be a pilot study that was implemented last summer with the city of Lake Elsinore. We had some Proposition State 1 funding to support that, and also worked with LESJWA and SAPO on this program as well. So this is a pilot study to try to address the blooms that are happening on a regular basis in Lake Elsinore, and that's a picture of one of the EVMWD data sondes out in the lake that's kept collecting real-time monitoring data. There's 2 of these sondes out there, so I don't know if you know that, but they're collecting profiles of the water daily, pH, DO, temperature, turbidity, and so forth. So that's some of the data that we've been using to process as well, in addition to our own data. Okay, so I will kick it off here. So the challenge with this lake, right? It's been, everybody knows that it's been through cycles of drought and it's in a temperature, it has high temperature, right? So it's in a basin that's shallow, has high evaporation. There's not really an outflow, so it very infrequently has water leaving the lake. So all the water that comes in evaporates and everything sort of concentrates, the nutrients and so forth, concentrate within the lake. So it has elevated nutrients, it has eutrophic conditions, it has the algae blooms that are associated with that feeding off of the algae. Then when the algae dies, the algae can suck up the dissolved oxygen, right? So the dissolved oxygen can drop, and that can lead to fish kills as well. We've had fires and floods. So we've given presentations on this before. The Holy Fire was another impact that happened to the region where the fire and it was followed by a big flood, a bunch of rain, and so a lot of material came into the lake, including some nutrients and sediments as well. And that led to more of a unique fish kill that we've talked about that happened during the winter due to a golden algae bloom, which was never seen before in the lake before too. So just another factor that this poor lake has had challenges with. So there's a TMDL, total maximum daily load, to address the nutrients within the lake, the water quality conditions, and work towards enhancing the quality of the lake. So a lot has been done with this lake. Lots and lots of work has been done over the years. And in the past, this lake would go dry. So the last time the lake has been dry was 1961. It would go through these periods of drought. Without the recycled water addition, it probably would have been dry in 2016 with our drought as well. The problem with that is that when it goes dry, you're going to have algae blooms. Before that happens, the lake probably doesn't look the best. And from historical records, you'd have flies, gnats, and then the dust, right? So it gets dusty. So nobody really wanted to have a dry lake. So one of the first things that was implemented was to halve the lake in size. So build the levee and shrink the size of the lake to stabilize the lake levels. So that would help avoid it. And then also add recycled water. And the recycled water really started kicking in from Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District in 2003. The initial discharges started coming into the lake to help stabilize lake levels, which it has done. So there's a level that is maintained by adding about 5 million gallons of water per day through tertiary treated water to the lake. So it's been successful at maintaining and stabilizing lake levels. Another way to help the lake is biological control. And last time, a colleague of mine, John Rudolph, he's off in the Bahamas right now, having fun. But he gave a talk about biological control, so looking at the populations of the zooplankton and the fish and what can be done. So the lake is stocked with a variety of bass species. I think carp, not carp, I'm sorry. What else is stocked out there? Catfish, are they stocked? fast, yeah. So the idea behind stocking, especially the predators, is that there's a big shad population of smaller fish. They eat the algae, the zooplankton, not the algae, the zooplankton. And the zooplankton eat the algae. So if we can control the shad populations by adding predators, that's one control mechanism. The problem with the lake, too, is that it does have high conductivity, and the zooplankton that eat the algae are challenged at high conductivity levels. So we want to see more Daphnia species eating the algae. But if we can control the shad population, that's one way to help. Another factor has been the carp populations in the lake, because they stir up the sediments and they bring nutrients into the water. There have been very high populations of carp in the past. We've been monitoring that to make sure that their population doesn't get to a point where we think that that's a major problem. There's a couple of our staff up there holding a big carp now. It's not from Lake Elsinore. I'm not sure where that is. That is one big carp. There's the LEAM system. So this is the system that was installed in 2005 and 2007, a series of pumps and a big aeration system, mixing system throughout the lake. The idea was to really mix the water, bring the deeper water up to the surface, bring the oxygenated water at the surface to the bottom, and help reduce the flux of nutrients from the sediments. And so there's a series of air pipes that go out there. They're delivering air throughout a good part of the year in the summer months and so forth. But they're not necessarily adding a lot of oxygen to the water, because that air is coming up pretty quickly. But it has shown that there's been success at reducing phosphorus loading from the sediments in the lake, but it really hasn't changed the look of the lake, right? You still have algae blooms, you still have those issues associated with eutrophication. And so you can actually see that picture of the lines out there. You can see the air lines out there when you're out there on a calm day. So it's kind of interesting. You can see that from satellite imagery, actually. So it's a huge system. I'll talk more about that in a little bit, in a couple slides as well. Okay. So the objectives of this pilot study were to research the different technologies that have been out there. There's a lot that's been done throughout the world and throughout the U.S. and California. Several of the vendors are here in the room, so reach out and talk to them about the different technologies that they've done. We went through a big series of different treatments and tried to pick just a couple that represent different types of treatments. So a chemical treatment, physical treatment, and we'll talk about these in a little bit, and try to get a range of the different possible viable options for this lake. It's a big lake to treat. So we drafted an RFQ, solicited proposals. We received those proposals. There was funding from the grant to give about $10,000 to each of the vendors if they were interested in participating. And then we installed and collected water quality data from this treatment systems. I'll show you some pictures of that. And then use that data to assess feasibility. How feasible is it to expand these treatments to the entire lake? What's the potential chance of success that might happen? And that's still ongoing. And then, of course, looking at recommendations. A big part of this was community outreach as well. So I know Steve Manos, Mayor, you were out there. Others, a lot of you came out there to see the lake and show the public what we're actually trying to do and the big efforts that are happening towards helping this lake. So this is what it looked like. We had a couple of locations at the north end of the lake near those piers, which are now out in the water because we've got so much water in the lake, so got to go take a look at that. That was the location of it. We had selected 3 in situ treatments. So we went out and actually got these barriers. They're curtains. And you can see in the picture here, they actually have a curtain that goes to the bottom. There's a weight at the bottom. And with the city, we went out and installed these. And so they were situated like that. You can see the bloom out there at the time was one of the worst blooms that the lake has had. We actually thought that might be great because we're going to test the conditions of the lake during the worst possible conditions, but I'll talk a little bit more about the challenge with regard to that when I show some data. They were fully enclosed. They do have seams, so it's not like they were super watertight, but they were pretty good at keeping the water within. So I'm going to talk about the different treatments, 3 different selected vendors that we tested out there. So the first one, C-Pro and Nutrifix. Have a representative here. So this is the chemical-based treatments. Chemical treatments are used all the time. Ponds, lakes, all over the world. They're successful in a variety of conditions and circumstances. Lake Elsinore is big, so it's going to be a big challenge to treat this entire lake. The idea was, potentially using spot treatments or cordon-off areas or so forth. The problem with chemical treatments is that you don't remove the algae, you kill the algae. They end up dying and getting into the sediments. They can release the toxins if you have toxins in the water. It's not necessarily a long-term treatment, but it can be a successful short-term treatment that is used. With this treatment, with Utrafix and C-Pro, copper-based algicide and a peroxide-based algicide were tested, as well as some treatments that bind up the phosphorus and bring that phosphorus out of the water column. And that's important because that's the food source for the algae. So it's a combination of treatments. Another treatment that was tested, biocleaner. So this has also been proven to be successful in smaller ponds, wastewater ponds, and so forth at different places throughout the world. Never in a big lake setting like this. So this is the first time. The idea with this is more of a microbial type treatment. So it has what they call a cedar reactor that kind of looks like zeolite within it. And it's got microbes on there that when you put them in the water and you add circulation, they start reproducing and they outcompete for nutrients, the cyanobacteria. And again, it's been proven in smaller settings, but this is the first time. So there's a vigorous pump, basically, and pumping that water and circulating it within this chamber. You can see the foam just coming up from the treatment there itself right there, and the amount of water moving. And the third one was working with Moliere and Aquatechnics, and Terry's here to talk about that, and Chris is here from Moliere. And this was, the idea was to, this is a proven technology as well. It's used in places all over the world. It's using nanobubbles, so you're injecting nanobubbles into the water. You can place them wherever you want, near the bottom or wherever. You can also use oxygen, or you can use ozone to pump into the system. And this is proven, like I said, to be successful in a lot of circumstances. These bubbles are so small that they're neutrally buoyant. They can provide an oxidative effect and actually physically kill the algae on contact. And they also can help reduce phosphorus flux from the water, from the sediments, if you can get those bubbles near the bottom of the lake. The fourth one was one that wasn't tested in the lake, but it was a pilot study outside the lake, more of a laboratory-type study. This is working with AECOM and the hydronucleation flotation technology that they have. They've been working on developing this technology. The benefit of it is that what it does is you add a polymer and you float the algae up to the surface, and then you can skim that algae off and actually physically remove the algae. And that was the laboratory study that was done. Actually, it was done right there on the benches out here using their treatment with lake water, pre and post treatment. You can see the difference in the color, and nutrients were reduced to about half in that particular experiment. But we didn't do this in the lake. Their system is big. Their system takes about 1 million gallons of water a day. And it's in a big container, as you can see in that picture right there, too. So for now, they don't have a small pilot system to test out. But there are plans to get it going in the lake, and we'll hear more about that today as a bigger pilot. So here's what it looked like. We did this monitoring over a 5-week period. It was during, again, one of the most challenging algae blooms that we have seen in the lake. We did weekly and semi-weekly monitoring. We looked at the water column profiles of pH, dissolved oxygen, temperature, turbidity. We took water quality samples for nutrients, chlorophyll, cyanotoxins, and we actually looked at the algae species that we were seeing. And we'll talk a little bit about the results here. So there's an actual picture of the surface of the lake. Sometimes if you go out there in the morning, you'll see the algae actually come up to the surface as it comes to get the sunlight and start photosynthesizing. It actually can be pretty wild looking. It looks sort of shimmering, but you can see the dramatic color that we were actually seeing during the tests that were being conducted. So I'm going to jump into some results. So this is dissolved oxygen. What you're looking at is the time series on the bottom and the different treatments. So look at this. In blue, we've got the biocleaner. In purple is Utrafix, chemical treatments, and then red is the Moliere unit, and then green is outside of the chambers. So that's outside of, so basically a control, what happens in the lake without the treatments. What I have on vertical lines here, it might be a little bit hard to see, but there are 4 different time periods when treatments were applied using the chemicals. The first treatment was Utrosorb and Phoslock, which binds up the phosphorus. So the idea was to remove that phosphorus from the water column. And then it was followed up with C-Clear, which is a copper-based chemical to kill the algae. And then the next one was, again, another Utrosorb and PAC-27. PAC-27 is a peroxide-based algicide, so a different type of algicide. And then again with C-Clear. So that just gives you an idea of timing of the treatments. What you can see in this figure here is that there was really one treatment that kind of kept the dissolved oxygen uniform. That was BioCleaner. It was a very vigorous pump that was pumping the water, so it was able to circulate the water. We were at about 10 feet of depth where these treatments were being performed. The other treatments, there was a little bit of difference there with the Moliere unit too. It was circulating the water as well. But obviously with chemical treatments, you're not mixing the water column. It's just staying as is. So we didn't see a big difference between that and outside the chambers, as you'd expect. Turbidity, not much of a change among all the treatments. So looked pretty similar across the board. So not a whole lot to say with regard to turbidity. Orthophosphorus. So again, this is the most bioavailable form of phosphorus, and it's something that we keep a close look at as to the effectiveness, and hopefully if we can knock that phosphorus down and nitrate especially, we can reduce the food for the algae. So here we also don't see a big difference among the different treatments, except the one kind of interesting one is with Utrafix. You see these spikes after the treatments with the algicides. And we do think that's actually showing a response because the chemical algicides are killing the algae break up, and they're releasing the nutrients into the water column. We actually we're able to see that with our chemical measurements. So we do have some confidence that the enclosures were working and keeping the water within them. There was probably some flow, but that was a signal that we saw from those treatments. Cyanobacteria. In this case, we saw there were high concentrations during the whole study. So these are all high. But what we do see is sort of a uniform concentration for the Moliere and the BioCleaner units. They were, again, mixing the water columns, so that was one of the factors. Whereas if we take surface water samples where the algicides were applied, for example, we might have higher concentrations of cyanobacteria because they're up near the surface. So this may be partially a reflection of just the mixing of the water and the way the sampling was conducted. But nothing that really knocked the cyanobacteria down. Again, this was a dramatic bloom that we were seeing. And this is kind of interesting. We're really interested in the toxins that the algae produce, right? So they don't always produce toxins, and there's a lot of uncertainty of exactly why and when they produce them. We know that typically when they die later on in the summer after a big bloom, they will start to produce toxins. But we don't see the same relationship between toxins and cyanobacteria concentrations. They don't correlate, and that's just because they don't always produce the toxins. So the treatments here didn't really have a good success at knocking down those toxins. Again, some of the toxin concentrations, this is microcystin, were some of the highest that we've recorded in the lake over time. So there's some challenges, right? We thought we were going out there to look at the worst conditions and we're going to have this amazing pilot study. But the problem that we really encountered was that the algae was in such a state of exponential growth that these treatments just had a hard time keeping up with what was happening. And there was probably a little bit of inflow from the seams and so forth, but it was just extreme conditions. There was enough food and nutrients in the water that these treatments could not keep up during this. And it kind of shows you the challenge of this lake. What's it going to take to treat the entire lake? The units, the BioCleaner Moliere units, I think they were designed really to be long-term treatments. So a 5 or 6 week study probably isn't enough to really get the long-term of collective effectiveness of those particular treatments. So there's more work happening. We also had a large storm right before these treatments, so it probably added an extra food source to the lake that was there. And we were stuck with what was there in the lake at the time. And so we had this food that the algae was just constantly feeding off of. So kind of in conclusions, the mesocosm treatments, the Utrafix chemical treatments, we do know that they were working and doing something, but they just weren't able to knock down the population of algae with the rapid growth. And despite the common use of algicides in ponds and lakes and other places, this was a unique situation. We did see that increase in phosphorus, so that gave us confidence that the chemical treatments were killing algae. It's just the algae kept reproducing so fast. The BioCleaner units and Moliere units stabilized the DO, so that was good. It actually got the DO close to down near the bottom, and that actually helps reduce phosphorus flux, so that was a positive. The microcystins inside of bacteria just weren't completely, we just didn't see a big effect with these treatments. And the bench scale study with AECOM showed that they were able to reduce the nutrients about half, not completely with that treatment. It did clean up the water, but it was an enclosed study. It wasn't out in the lake, so just keeping that in mind. So there's a lot of other options out there that we didn't test or that are still being entertained and being looked at today. There's this ultrasound approach using LG Sonic as one vendor that uses ultrasonic sounds to kill the algae. This has been found to be mixed with mixed success in some lakes and ponds and so forth, but to do something like that in Lake Elsinore, you need like 100 of these units, and if you're out there in a boat, that's a lot of obstacles to work through. Floating wetlands, that actually has been tried. A study was done in 2007, but they were pretty small wetlands. But the wind and the waves, the pelicans just tore these things apart in the lake, unfortunately. So maybe at a much larger scale, it could be something that could be entertained. Algae skimmer boats, they work great if you have macroalgae or algae that's at the surface. That could be entertained when we have mats out there. Success in a lake that's got a lot of microalgae. These are tiny little algae that are throughout the water column. It's going to be hard for a boat to suck up all that algae and actually get rid of it. Can be successful again for mats, but natural wetlands are being treating inflows. That's a possibility. So trying to reduce the nutrients from, say, EVMWD's inflow into the lake. You get those nutrients down. That would be helpful. Natural wetlands can do the same thing. So there's some ideas and restoration activities at the south end of the lake. Army Corps is involved with some ideas as well. If you can route that water up and through the wetlands have a natural ability to reduce nutrients. So that's something that's on the table. Biotar bags. This is one where it's been proven in some locations where they have these bags that just absorb the nutrients from the water. But you'd have to have so many of them out in the lake here. It just doesn't seem to be a feasible option. And then you'll hear more about this today. Hypolimnetic oxygenation or a Spies cone, really injecting high concentrations of oxygen into the bottom of the lake. The lake needs the oxygen to reduce that phosphorus and to enhance the dissolved oxygen through the water column. Finally, dredging. It's been discussed, extremely expensive. You got to get the permits. You got to figure out where to put all that material. What are you going to do with it? If you do it when it's full of water, there's challenges with regard to that. You could let it dry out and scrape the bottom and create islands potentially and cap it with clay, but the expenses are huge to do something like that and create physical structure maybe around the island. So it's an idea, but I don't know. Nobody probably wants to see a dry lake to do something like that. So it's kind of off the table right now. The next steps is to continue looking at the feasibility of the treatments that have been performed and the ones that are going to be that are currently going on, and we'll hear more about that at the meeting here today. We're currently under contract with GEI, PACE, Engineering, and Dr. Anderson, and Dr. Horn as well, looking at the feasibility of the hypolimnetic oxygenation and different options for using the current air system, the LEAM system right now, whether we use that system, modify it, or try another system to get oxygen to the bottom of the lake. So that's a current project that we're working on with the team. And it has some good promise, so looking forward to seeing how that all develops. Let's see, what else have we got here? So right now, today part of it will be looking at the increased Moliere nanobubble system, a bigger pilot study that's out there in the lake right now. So I won't give all the details with that. You'll hear more about that from Chris. And then prop funding, or from Adam. I think Adam might be talking about that. And then looking at potential prop funding to get the AECON unit up there to physically remove algae. There's some discussion about doing that at the top of the lake and maybe booming off an area. Maybe we'll hear more about that today too. Current conditions. So this is a picture of the lake just a couple weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago. Unbelievable. 5 meters of visibility. We've never seen the lake that clear ever. It was ready to break out the mask and snorkel. So I just looked at it today. It's way down. It's maybe down to about 1 meter of visibility. So it is starting. This is the time of year. April and May is typically when the water is the clearest in the lake. Not always, but that's typically the nutrients are down and the algae is down from the winter. We had a lot of rains that really helped the lake. Seen an explosion of zooplankton, which is amazing. So these Daphne, we've taken samples, we're looking at them, but these guys eat the algae. So these guys are out there actively eating up the algae. The conductivity is down and the lake is at a higher level than it's been at for years. So the lake is in a great state with the natural conditions that have happened with all the rain. There is the Moliere unit that's out there. There's also the EVMWD water has been turned off. I think it was at the end of February, so we've reduced that flow coming into lake because the lake is so high. So that's also a reduction in nutrients coming into lake as well. So there's a bunch of different factors that are coming into play, but it does show you the resiliency of the lake at going from basically the worst condition we've seen in 6 months to the best conditions that we've seen in years. So it's pretty amazing. There's a lot of hope that things can work out to help this lake. I think that's all I have. All right. Well, thank you. It was a pleasure sharing.